So welcome to the Herb Society of America's webinar series. I'm Karen Kennedy, the educator for the Herb Society. And with me is Maria Noel Groves. Maria is a returning presenter, so welcome back, Maria. We are pleased to have her. She's a best-selling author of award-winning book, Body into Balance and Grow Your Own Herbal Remedies, which I happen to have right here with me. It's a wonderful book. She's also the owner of Wintergreen Botanicals, Herbal Clinic and Education Center in New Hampshire. So she is used to writing and teaching nationally and offers both on-site and distance herbal study courses and health consultations. She melds the evidence-based medicine, traditional Western herbalism, and food-based nutrition and personal clinical experience into all the information that she uses as she teaches. So Maria, thank you for being here today, and take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It's always an honor to be here for one of your events. And if you see me like sweating over here, I can't decide whether it's warm or cool in the house today. So I may reach over to turn on a fan or something like that. But in fact, I think I'm going to. The sun just came out, so now it's suddenly baking in here. But and let me know if that fan. Transition. What's that?
We're in that weird seasonal transition where, you know, we have a little toe left in summer and technically it's fall.
Yeah. Well, also I'm under a lot of hot lights in order to like improve how well you can all see me. So that warms things up quite a bit. So I am really excited to be here. Thank you for the really nice introduction. And I am going to just kind of bump myself over here so I won't be able to see me, but you'll be able to see me and go over to the slides. So today, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite general categories of herbs, and we're going to be focusing on herbs that you can grow in your garden that fit this category, and that is herbs that are sort of peaceful, herbs that evoke a state of peacefulness in your body, which is a very broad term or broad statement. So we're going to be talking about different herbs that are nourishing the nervous system, calming the nervous system, some of them that are going to help support sleep and are a little bit more sedating, and some that are more uplifting and or promote calm energy. So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about. There are so many herbs that are in this category, and almost all of them are herbs that you can grow relatively easily depending upon where your exact ecosystem is. There are only a few herbs that we tend to use in this category that don't really grow easily in most gardens. Like, for example, kava kava is a great relaxing herb, but it really is more specific to places like Hawaii and Polynesian islands. But most of the rest of us in the continental United States would have a hard time growing that one. So Karen already gave me a great introduction. It's in the slides if you want to learn a little bit more about me. Those are my two books, which I also have behind me. And I won't really get into that because this is really about the plants, but there's a lot of information on this topic in both of those books. And then I have a ton of information for free on my website that you're welcome to check out. If you do get the slides, these links are clickable. And so when you have the PDF of the slides open on your computer, you can just hit those and they'll open up websites. I can't promise that there won't occasionally be a broken link here or there, but most of the time that you see something underlined, it will open up a web page or resources or a study or something like that. I do want to cover really briefly my basic safety rules, and we'll go into a couple extra things that are a little bit more specific to this topic too. But of course, I'm not a doctor, so I can't diagnose or prescribe, and especially in this avenue as a general class, this is really just general information and not customized health advice for you. The plants we're covering are generally pretty safe for most people, but no one plant is perfect for everybody. And so you can either, hire an herbalist or a naturopathic doctor to help guide you in your own herbal use. You should always keep your doctor in the loop. And if you have certain health concerns, sometimes modern medicine is the best approach, and sometimes herbal medicine works really well, and sometimes we use a combination of them. But it's always a great idea to chat with your healthcare provider. If you are going to be trying out self-treatment, which is what a lot of my classes and my books and things are all about, are encouraging and empowering people in self-treatment when that's appropriate, you do want to take some basic safety rules into consideration. So first and foremost, if you're going to be using an herb for the first time, especially if you're planning on using it in higher doses or on a regular basis, it's a good idea to really get to know that plant and get to know it from a variety of different perspectives so that you understand it before you start using it. So just one little soundbite might be fun, but you just don't get a full sense of what that herb might do, when it's most appropriate and when it's less appropriate. So research. I'm a bit of a research nut. I love to look things up, and I do on my website have a list of recommended books on the recommended reading page, and I have a lot of really great free websites that folks can check out for other sorts of free information if you're not ready to go out and buy a book. And it's nice to get mostly the perspective of somebody who's an herbalist, who really knows and is working with a plant and is seeing clients and really has that deeper understanding of the herbs. But I do like to throw a little bit of science-based or evidence-based resources into the mix, and I have those separated out on my website under those different extra places for resources. Also equally important is listening to your body and your intuition. So what plants are drawing you to them? It might be, something like you're dreaming about it or something like that, but it could just be that you're just drawn to it, that it just sounds like it appeals to you, and you really, maybe it's in your garden that's really calling to you. And then as you take it, also listen to your body and see how you respond. Are you having the effect that you're hoping? Sometimes the effects are pretty quick, especially for a lot of the herbs that we're talking about today. Most of the time, those herbs start to have some effect within an hour, or certainly within a day or a week. And sometimes it builds slowly over time. But, are you having the effect you're hoping to have? Does it just feel like it resonates with you? Are you having any negative effects? Maybe it's a timing issue or a dose issue, or maybe that's just not the right herb for you. So really, get in touch with that. Ensure the identity 100%. Most of the plants we're talking about today are plants that you would probably cultivate in your garden. And so hopefully, if you're purchasing a plant with a name tag on it, that it's going to be what you think it is. But mistakes happen all the time, so I would never take anything for granted. Look up some good quality pictures online, look up the botanical descriptions and confirm. Maybe even wait for it to flower so you can be, a little bit more sure. Plants are easier to identify when they're in flower. And then certainly if you're doing any wild harvesting, it's a good idea to have some field identification guides and to really practice those skills and make sure that you're 100% on your plant identification before you start consuming it. And then last but not least, if you are on pharmaceuticals, the quick answer is to double check with your pharmacist to see if an herb might interact. They usually have pretty good databases, and some pharmacists also have pretty good training in herb drug interactions. They can't tell you what to take or not take. That's generally not the realm of a pharmacist, but they do have good resources and they can tell you if there's possibly going to be an interaction. And then if you want more advice on what herbs to take alongside the pharmaceuticals that you have, herbalists and naturopaths tend to have more training in those areas. And it's always a good idea to keep your doctor in the loop. And if you do want to adjust your medications at all, or if it would be appropriate, maybe you're adding an herb that's sedating, but you are already on a sedating medication, it might end up being appropriate to wean down the dose of the medication, but that would be something you would need to work with your doctor and have your doctor advise you on. It's most of us as holistic practitioners can't legally or ethically do that, and individuals, you can run into some pretty serious problems when we just tinker with our medications without getting proper guidance. So we're going to go into just a little bit of an overview of some of the basics, and then we'll get into some of my key herbs. And there are so many bonus slides because this is really just an hour talk, but I've done much longer versions of this. And so instead of cutting out all the extra slides, I moved the things that I don't think we'll get to the back so that you have them as added resources. So more plants, tips on harvesting, drying, remedy making. There are all sorts of extra things, some recipes and things that'll be towards the end. And the slides that have stars on them are ones that I consider to be bonus slides. And so I'm not really planning to get to any of those. They're just there for you as extra resources. So some basics when we're thinking about herbs for supporting the nervous system in particular and just in general, but especially when we're talking about mood and stress and sleep and all those things, which, are common areas for us, especially in the United States, to have problems with. And I think with the pandemic, well, not I think, I know there's been a lot of research to show that we're experiencing, even more stress and even more anxiety and even more mood issues with all of the craziness that has been happening for the past year and a half. And, we kind of had hoped to be in a better place at this point in time, a year and a half into it. And in some ways we might be, but in a lot of ways we're not. And I think that adds, an additional layer for a lot of people. And some people might be feeling, even increased stress or anxiety or an insomnia. Also, as we head into the winter time, for those of us who are in these, darker, colder climates, that can also be a trickier time. So this is a nice time to learn what tools are in your toolbox and start to form those alliances with the herbs, some of which you might even be able to go out and harvest this, and late summer right now, and other ones you might consider growing for next year. And certainly you can also purchase products in stores and from herb shops and herb farms. I don't sell plants, so that's not my thing, but there are a lot of great places to do that. So herbs are a wonderful, tool in the toolbox for supporting our nervous system and our mood. They're definitely not the only tool, and they really work best in conjunction with other things. So especially alongside good, healthy diet, you'd be surprised how much of our mood can be influenced by whether or not we're eating fruits and vegetables, and whether or not the foods we're eating are stabilizing for our blood sugar or making it, go really up and down. Those kinds of things can have a major impact on our mood. So even for things like the nervous system, that can be important. Exercise, hugely, movement, hugely helpful. Spending time in nature, other lifestyle habits like deep breathing, gratitude activities, those things can all be really wonderful. And if we're employing those alongside herbs, we often have an even better effect, and we end up setting up healthy habits that will support our mood and our sleep and our well-being ongoing for the rest of our lives. Herbs do have really cool personalities. Each herb is a little bit different, and we're going to be talking about some of the little differences of some of my favorites. And so it's nice to find the right one that you can be in relationship with, or if you're a practitioner, for your client. But I'm assuming that in this case, most of you are kind of everyday folks who are looking for herbs that might support your own, health and happiness and well-being. Also, for herbs all the time, it always helps to have good quality herbs that are, properly identified, but, also just really like optimal potency and freshness. But especially for a lot of the herbs that we'll be talking about today, they're even more persnickety of, like how well they work, depending upon how fresh they are, how freshly that remedy has been made, how freshly that plant was harvested, how well and carefully it was handled during the drying or the remedy making process. I mean, that can be a factor for herbs across the board, but there are so many herbs in this category specifically that are really, really sensitive to that. And so you'll get much better results if you're working with really good quality plants. And the ones that are in your backyard are often the best plants of all. So the things that you can make yourself might seem like they're not as fancy as some, extract in the store, but often they end up working better because you have the benefit of being able to really handle them gently and to work with them in their freshest states. So those are all nice things to keep in mind. A lot of these herbs do have pretty immediate effects, but often taking them in the long term will produce even better effects that build over time. So if you are using pharmaceuticals, in addition to the tips I already gave you, I have a couple extra safety tips and suggestions. So, and this is kind of assuming that you're using herbs potentially alongside medications for mood, for sleep, antidepressants, anti-anxiety herbs, those kind of anti-anxiety drugs, those kinds of things. They can sometimes be combined safely, but you do need to be a lot more careful about it. And I'm not even really getting into many other types of herb drug interactions, but we'll focus on some of the most common ones. So keep in mind that if you're taking more sedative, sleep inducing, really like central nervous system depressing herbs, that these might increase central nervous system sedation alongside medications that are geared for anxiety, a lot of our mood medications like antidepressants. Some of our pain medications work by affecting the nervous system and by dampening the nervous system response. So alongside those, you can sometimes run into issues, and then also certainly sleep medications, because they might have a synergy where one is sedating and then you add another. Even alcohol falls in this category too, that now you're even more sedated. Sometimes if it's just a little bit, it's not necessarily a bad thing. So, maybe you were taking something for sleep and it was helping okay, but not great. So adding like a gently calming herb in with it might just be enough to help you sleep even better or bring that anxiety down a notch a little bit more. But where it could be a problem is if it's so sedating that it's now aggravating depression, or you fall asleep at the wheel, or you're falling asleep at work, or you're just feeling really sleepy and groggy during the day. Or in extreme cases, which we don't see that often, but it's possible that if you were taking like a lot of sedating things at the same time, you might even find that it's like harder to breathe, or if you have sleep apnea, there might be a greater risk that you don't wake up when your body needs to breathe, or that your heart rate might go down too much, or your blood pressure might go down too much. Usually with most of the herbs we'll be talking about, that's not a huge concern, but it is a possibility, especially alongside those more sedating medications. So you want to be really careful to avoid that, limit that, watch that. Also, we're not really going to focus on St. John's wort a whole lot. It's one of the extra bonus slides, but I do want to mention that St. John's wort interacts with a lot of different kinds of medications, including especially antidepressant, serotonin boosting medications. There's a risk of increased serotonin and risk of serotonin syndrome, which is a dangerous condition. And with many other medications, it interacts by clearing them out of your system too quickly so that your levels of the drugs drop. It doesn't interact with everything, but it probably interacts with more than half the medications on the market. And this is a pretty well-known interaction. So if you do ask your pharmacist, they should be able to tell you whether or not your drugs that you're on are likely or not likely to interact with St. John's wort. Also keep in mind that herbs may or may not be adequate substitutes for a medication that you're on. So it really depends on the person, it depends on the situation, and you should always work with your doctor if you do think that you might need to adjust or wean down on a medication. That's often a good time to consider employing a holistic professional as well to support you on the herbal side at the same time that you're working with your doctor on the medication side. So those are my basic, suggestions on that. So in my book, Body into Balance, I have this kind of nervous system continuum of herbs, from the really stimulating, caffeine-containing herbs to energizing adaptogens down to like the more sedating sleep herbs. And we're going to be focusing kind of a little bit more on that more calming half of the spectrum. And there are little links here. So there's a big slide on adaptogens and how they affect all sorts of different body systems that you could check out as a bonus if you wanted. I did also put in this overall chart for pretty much all the slides that are in here, including the bonus ones, on which ones are easier or harder to grow, whether they're adaptogens, nootropics, or herbs that support brain and cognitive health, whether they're uplifting and mood boosting, nervine, herbs that are nervous system restoratives, things that are a little bit more calming, things that are a little bit more sleep enhancing, and things that are more strongly sedating, and then some other little, tidbits in there. So you can feel free to check that out, because a lot of herbs do multiple things, and you'll still want to get to know each plant individually beyond just, which boxes are checked off. But this can help you get a feel for where is this herb, and you'll notice that a lot of the herbs that we'll talk about today cross across many, but not necessarily all of these categories. Many of these herbs, everything we're talking about today is possible to grow, but I just kind of have a quick list of a few that are perennial, so they're, hopefully likely to come back each year, some that are container friendly, some that are annuals that you'll have to plant or allow to self-seed each year. and some that are tender perennials that will need to be brought indoors. They're usually coming from more warmer climates, at least than where I am. I'm in New Hampshire. And things that are, you know, if you've got things that are trees and shrubs and woody vines, these might take several years to really produce an adequate harvest, especially the trees and the shrubs like magnolia and mimosa and roses. I also have this slide on general adult herb dosing in here, and it's just approximate. Always start low if you're new to an herb, but it'll give you just a general idea of approximately how much with most of these herbs you might be able to aim for a dose. Start with just a tiny bit and gradually work up to the low end, and then, you know, if that seems okay, but maybe not enough, you can bump up to the higher end of the recommended dosing. And I do have a blog with information on how to make a lot of different recipes on there that you can check out. So let's get into some of my favorites. These are sort of loosely organized from ones that are, you know, sort of, they're all calming, but some are more calming and energizing. And then we're gradually going to go towards the more sleep-inducing, more sedating herbs. And so they're loosely organized by action and what it does, but keep in mind that many herbs do more than one thing. And the herbs I'm really going to highlight are the ones that are my absolute favorites. I use them often in my own personal life and or in my clinical practice. They're some of the easiest ones to grow for as a general rule, and that I find them pretty impactful in their use. So most people usually do notice some improvement relatively quickly with the herbs that we're going to talk about today. So the first category are adaptogens, and adaptogens are herbs that help our body adapt to stress. It's kind of like a trendy topic these days, and they make us a little bit more resilient to stress. They often are a little bit more energizing in nature, and they're working, at least in part, by helping modulate the way that stress hormones are produced in our body. And even within them, we have some that are more stimulating and some that are more calming. A lot of them are trickier to grow, or, you know, you might have to wait several years to harvest them. In many cases, we're using the roots of the plants. And so a lot of them, while you might be able to grow them in the garden, are just a little bit trickier or harder to find. So I'm going to focus on some that are popular in India that are relatively easy to grow in the United States as annuals or as tender perennials, and that would be the ashwagandha and holy basil. But there are a few others. We'll talk a little bit about magnolia, which is a common tree that, you know, might take several years to grow, but you might already have some in your yard and be surprised that it might have medicinal uses. And gotu kola is another favorite of mine, and there are a few other odds and ends that aren't too hard to grow in the garden. Be aware that especially the more stimulating adaptogens might aggravate sleep. They might, in some cases, agitate for some people their anxiety levels, but they often are helpful for lifting up the spirits, giving some energy, those kinds of things. The herbs that we're going to be focusing on are less likely to be on that more agitating side, and it's also very individual too. So ashwagandha is the first one I want to mention. I don't have ashwagandha here because my ashwagandha has been getting eaten alive by potato beetles this year. It'll still make good root medicine, but it's in the nightshade family alongside potatoes and tomatoes and eggplant. And so if you do have a sensitivity to plants in that family, you may or may not also have a sensitivity to ashwagandha. Most people tolerate it pretty well, but you can grow it much like you would grow tomatoes. You can grow it in containers if you want to, or you can grow it in the ground. It does like to have slightly drier soil, but especially it really likes sun. This is a plant that grows in India in drier, sunnier places, and it does like really nutrient-rich soil. And so for me, being in the middle of a pine forest in New Hampshire, I usually tend to grow it right near a more south-facing stone wall where it catches a lot more warmth, gets a lot of sun. There's a white fence behind it that really captures the sun. And as long as it doesn't get too crowded out by other plants, it usually does pretty well. In India, they would let it grow for 2 years and harvest it at the end of the second season when those berries, they look like little tomatillo kind of husks with a little reddish berry, and when those berries turn a little bit more of like an orangey red color. But in places like the North Country and most of the United States, it's not going to survive the winter. And so we would usually just harvest it in fall, right around, just before the first frost. If you can wait till those little berries form, that's nice, but it's not absolutely required. I do find that our like 1-year-old plants growing in the United States tend to be a little gentler than the ones that you can buy from India, but they're both good. It just depends on what kind of a stimulating strength you want from it. So ashwagandha, we're usually using the roots of this plant, and they do have a long history of use in Ayurveda in India. The ashwagandha is also a plant that has a tradition of medicinal use throughout different areas of Africa where it grows. And often in Ayurveda, we're using it to give us the strength of a stallion. So the idea is that if you take this herb regularly for a year, that you'll have the strength of a stallion for the next 10 years. So that is in bed, but it's not only that kind of energy. It definitely has a history of use around fertility and libido in all genders, but particularly for things like improving sperm motility and more masculine libido, testosterone levels, it tends to be more famous for that. But all genders can use it. It does have benefit for all genders in that way, but it does so much more than that. And really in my own practice, I tend to be working with it in a lot of other ways. So it's deep energy. It's really helpful oftentimes for folks who feel really fatigued, maybe even a little bit depressed. There are a lot of studies on it that show benefits in a wide array of areas, including helping to support mood, uplift depression. It does tend to have a little bit of an anxiety easing property. It is a nervine as well. Nervines are herbs that nourish and support the nervous system and often have a little bit of a calming effect, but not necessarily a sedating effect. And ashwagandha definitely falls into that. So some people have less anxiety, better mood, better sleep with ashwagandha, but some other people in a rare subset get a little overstimulated by it and might actually find that they feel a little agitated, that it aggravates sleep, especially if they have it later in the day. Maybe it even agitates anxiety. So it really depends on the person, but for most people, it has a very gentle, calming, and energizing effect that people really like and often start to feel within just a few days to a week or so, and improved effects with regular use. It is also a thyroid boosting herb, and so that's nice. A lot of people do have a slightly sluggish thyroid, especially folks who are dealing with perimenopause. Oftentimes it kicks in during that time frame, and ashwagandha can give a little bit of a boost to that. I personally would not use it in folks who are at all hyperthyroid, and I would be very careful combining it with thyroid boosting medications like Synthroid, levothyroxine, because it might overstimulate the thyroid. But also you can try out, with everything at night, it's nice to start with a lower dose so you can see, where you're at. But know that it can usually in a good way boost thyroid, but occasionally it's a little too much push there. It tends to be immunomodulatory, which can often be helpful for folks dealing with autoimmune diseases. It's usually not going to be a quote, we can never say herbs cure anything, but I would definitely say for something as complicated as autoimmune disease, it's not necessarily a cure for any of those things, but it's often supportive for folks in formula. It's anti-inflammatory, especially when combined with other anti-inflammatory herbs to help with things like joint pain. It is an herb to consider for something like long haul COVID. There's no official proof, but just based on its tradition of use and support for that kind of deep fatigue, the respiratory system, immune system, anti-inflammatory, it would be worth considering as a supportive herb for folks who are dealing with that. But generally pretty awesome plant. Let me see if there are any questions. I'm going to try to occasionally take a peek at the question and answer box. And I don't think I see any, but feel free if you want to throw questions in. We'll probably do most of our answers towards the end, but if I see a question and it's easy for me to answer, I'll answer it earlier. I also need to be mindful of time so we can get through like more than just 2 or 3 plants. But this is a really great one. It's, I find that if you grow it, you don't expect to be getting huge harvests, but it is something that you can grow and get a harvest that fall and be able to make a little bit of medicine for yourself with. It stinks when you dig it up. Its name, ashwagandha, supposedly means smells like horse or smells like horse urine. It's supposed to have that like energy of a horse or a stallion. And I don't think it smells like urine personally, but it does have a very like strange, funky, stinky kind of smell. It subsides a little once it's done drying, but traditionally in Ayurveda, they would usually use it dried. So I personally dehydrate it in a dehydrator. I'll clean the roots, chop them up, put them in the dehydrator on a tray. In fact, I have a picture earlier of, let me just bounce back to that. So this is actually ashwagandha root on a dehydrator tray. And so then I'll let them dehydrate, but I just dehydrate it by itself because it will affect the flavor of other herbs that are drying at the same time. And your house will kind of have a funky smell while it's drying. Don't use too much heat because we do want to retain a little bit of those properties. But once it's totally dry, it is a lot more palatable and it's pretty easy to make a tincture, which is an alcohol extract. You can powder it up and use it for teas. You can add it to broths. You can add the powder to all sorts of foods and smoothies. It blends pretty well with chai spices like cinnamon and cardamom, or chocolate if you want it to be a little bit more stimulating, or all sorts of things like that. So it's pretty adaptable to a lot of different kinds of recipes. It's a classic one to simmer in milk in Ayurveda. And part of the thinking of that is that it helps drive it to the nervous system, because our nervous system is lined with fat along the myelin sheaths. And the idea being that if you put it in a fatty base like milk or ghee or coconut oil or some other fat, coconut milk, that will, as your body tries to use that fat to like support the nervous system and rebuild the nervous system, that herb might be, kind of taken up in the matrix. Whether or not it exactly works like that is hard to say, but I do think that when we look to the ways that herbs are traditionally used, we often find that they do have more potency. Folks are onto something. There's a reason why these traditions are built over time, is because they usually work better, even if we don't have a good explanation for why it works better. So holy basil is another one, and this one I do have here, and I don't have my camera up. Let me see if I can pull that back up here so I can see what you're seeing in the video. So it's already wilting a little because even though it's in water, it doesn't always like being picked right away, but there we go. So this is holy basil, and it's just a lovely herb. It has a really nice smell that's kind of like cloves. It's got eugenol in it, which is a similar essential oil that's also in clove. It does have a little bit of a basil-y quality, but it's not the same as your culinary basil. You would grow it in similar ecosystem scenarios as you would your culinary basils. It likes, rich soil, good moisture, so it likes to get watered pretty regularly, but it also wants good drainage. It doesn't want to be sitting in a soggy soil, and it loves it to be warm and full sun. And when all the other plants, you get those really hot days and all the other plants are like, oh, like can't handle it anymore, the basil, including the holy basil, are like, bring it, we love this. And so it's pretty easy to grow. It's one of the easiest, if not the easiest adaptogen to grow. So it's gently adaptogenic. It has a little bit of a gentle energy. It does support the nervous system, so especially for folks who are dealing with stress and want to be not sedated, but like just calm down a little bit. Holy basil is excellent for that, and we use all the above ground parts. This particular one is sometimes called Kapoor Tulsi. Tulsi is another name for holy basil, sacred basil, and then there are different varieties and species. And so this one is sometimes called Kapoor or temperate Tulsi, or it might be an actual like Ocimum sanctum, Ocimum tenuiflorum species. Those are just two names, the old name and the new name for one species of holy basil. But there is some speculation that it might actually be a variety of a Africanum type of basil instead. But regardless, it's used much like the other holy basils and Tulsi plants that are used in Ayurveda. This is the one that tends to grow the most easily and abundantly in a temperate climate. And this is the one that I personally work with. I have grown most, if not all, of the other, typical Tulsi varieties and species, but I stick with this one because it just does such a nice job in the garden, and it's excellent medicine. I love to use it fresh. I love to use it dry. It always wants to bloom. So what I'll do is I'll just keep pinching off these flowers and I'll throw them in my water. I'll throw them in my seltzer. You can make hot or cold teas with them, whatever you want to do. It's really kind of like similar medicine throughout the whole plant. But if you keep pinching back the flowers, it'll keep getting bushier and bushier. And then as it gets a little bigger, I might start, periodically pruning off larger quantities. And then sometimes I'll give it a bad haircut, which is when I take a whole bunch of it together and I just take my scissors and I hack across. And I do want to leave like at least a couple sets of leaves behind so that it still has the energy to keep growing. But holy basil really is a super generous plant. I'm just going to get my own screen back over to the PowerPoint so I can see what I have written here. But holy basil really is a super generous plant in the garden. You can see it there in my garden, just really like, I'm down low, so it makes it look a little bigger than it really is in the picture, but very abundant. And you can dry it, you can use it fresh. What you tend to find dried in commerce tends to be really low quality. So I would either grow it and dry it yourself or make fresh remedies with it, or get it from a local herb farm or a United States herb farm that has really carefully handled it and that it's a recent harvest. It does keep pretty well dried for at least a year or two, but it's just incomparable what you'll get from your own garden or from direct from an herb farmer versus what you get on kind of like the bigger international market of bulk dried herbs. So why do we like holy basil so much? It is also an adaptogen, and it's generous. It's super aromatic. So it has these like nice aromatics that are just kind of like a little invigorating, a little calming at the same time. It tends to be really good at balancing cortisol, which is one of our stress hormones. But cortisol is also a hormone that's related to blood sugar. So, there are a couple different times when cortisol would normally come out to play. One would be when you're between meals and your blood sugar tends to get low, your cortisol will kick in with that low blood sugar to say, whoa, like we need some sugar, so let's pull some sugar out of storage. So one of the things that cortisol will do is it'll tell your body to take sugar out of storage and put it into the bloodstream so that you have energy, because sugar, glucose, is one of the main sources of energy in the body. So it'll do that when your blood sugar is low, like when you're not eating, or some people have blood sugar that dips in the middle of the night, and so they might wake up because they're having this surge of cortisol and the surge of blood sugar because the body thinks it needs blood sugar because it's low. The other time that we tend to see cortisol rising is when we're under stress, because the body thinks you're under stress, you need to flee or you need to fight, and that requires energy. And so we're going to flood you with extra blood sugar, even if you already had okay blood sugar, because we think you need more of it. And so that's not always a really helpful response, especially when we're under stress all the time or when our blood sugar response is a little bit more wobbly. And so having holy basil, especially having it with your meals, I find, because it is a little bit hypoglycemic, tends to really mellow out those blood sugar ups and downs, as well as those, cortisol stress hormone spikes. When you get a surge of cortisol, not only do you get a little sugar in your system, but you also get a little bit of a jolt of energy. And sometimes that's good. Sometimes you need a little stress to think more when you're on your feet at work or something like that. But, on a daily basis, it's really pretty exhausting for the body. It amps up inflammation and has all sorts of other negative downstream effects. And holy basil tends to be really phenomenal for supporting those kinds of patterns because it's a little bit calming, it's a little bit uplifting, it's definitely mood boosting, it's gently energizing, it's cognition enhancing, it is a little bit blood sugar lowering. It is also anti-inflammatory. It's not like the only anti-inflammatory you'll ever need, but that's one of the things that comes in its package of benefits. And the mood effects to me feel very zen. If you've ever watched things like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and other Kung Fu type movies, and you see the Kung Fu master, and they're just like super calm, but very deftly able to handle whatever, fights are coming their way, and they're just able to dodge and bob and weave and do what they need to do without getting too worked up about it, and just being in kind of a nice, mellow, zen-like space. And I feel like holy basil does a really nice job like that. If you're having a lot of holy basil and you're really feeling it, it's sort of the feeling that you get when you come out of a nice yoga class or a nice meditation session. You're just kind of in just a really nice place. It is interesting that this has a lot of spiritual significance in the Hindu religion, which I'm not an expert in. I really don't know that much about. So take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, but it is oftentimes planted in temples throughout India. And I kind of wonder, since I noticed that in a lot of different spiritual cultures, plants that are super aromatic tend to be used to create sacred space, to promote calm, to, bring the spirituality, the spirit of place into the room, to bring Paris to the heavens and to ward off negative energies. And I kind of wonder if that's partly why holy basil has gotten popular as a result, because it does have that nice strong aroma. If you're walking by it, it's one of the most potently scented herbs in the garden. It is really tasty, I think. Some people don't like it, but most people really like holy basil. Most people really like the way they feel with holy basil. There are occasionally some people who feel like they're a little bit more high or spacey with holy basil, and I've run into the rare person that feels like a little bit anxious with it. But it's very rare. Most people do really nicely with it. It also supports digestion, increases digestion a little bit. It also helps support us as we're fighting infections and supports the immune system function, just kind of as a more indirect action, but definitely a good protector in a lot of different ways. It seems to have some anti-cancer effects. So it's a nice one. If it's something that, appeals to you, it's a nice one to incorporate into your regular use. When it comes going back to that cortisol thing, it tends to be really nice for helping to support blood sugar levels and reduced cravings, especially for folks who seem to have blood sugar wobbles and food cravings relating to stress. And having it with meals unsweetened is really the best way. But if you are planning on having it when you have an empty stomach, in that case, I would make sure you have at least some sweetener in it or something like that, because it is hypoglycemic. And if you had it on an empty stomach, you didn't have any sugar in your system at the same time, it could make your sugar drop too low. So, having it with food or having it, maybe gently sweetened with honey, if you were using it for other reasons than blood sugar, just for, energy or something like that, maybe throw a little sweetener of some sort in with it. Let's see, anything else I want to say? There's some animal research that calls into question whether or not it's entirely safe, especially in hypothyroid. I have not seen a problem with it, and I use it a lot, and myself and with clients and with a lot of folks who have things like Hashimoto's as well as Graves', and I have never seen any problems, but some animal studies call that into question, so keep that in the back of your mind. If you're trying to get pregnant or you are pregnant, it's probably not the best herb to use during those times. But besides that, it's usually pretty well tolerated by most people. And I don't think I see any questions, so I'm just going to keep on going. These down here, my mouse likes to fall asleep on me, but these down here are different resources and in some cases studies that you can open up. So magnolia, this is another one that I thought I'd mention because a lot of people probably have it growing around them and don't realize that it is potentially medicinal and useful. And I learned about using magnolia from a combination of Mary Bove, who taught me that it's a really great herb for the stress response and also for circadian rhythms when you're, waking up in the middle of the night in a sort of fight or flight state. And also I learned about it from Leslita Williams, who taught me that you can use not our native, but our common species of the United States, similar to the way that they use magnolia in China, because there's a Magnolia officinalis that's used in Chinese traditional medicine, but we have a lot of other species around. So I personally use my Stellata Cobus cross. So Stellata is your star magnolia, and a lot of the smaller white flowered magnolias that are growing in the northern climates like where I am and are cultivated are in the star magnolia group, but probably a lot of other magnolias have similar use. And I didn't think to grab any magnolia branches, but if you scratch and sniff the bark a little bit, it usually has this nice aroma that's kind of a little bit like ginger and lemongrass and a little root beer like, and that's a good indicator of the potency. And so I make an alcohol extract of it fresh. It does extract pretty well in alcohol. You could try other formats, but tea is probably not going to be the strongest, but you can do it. You can use the flowers, but the bark is a little bit stronger. And there are a lot of different uses to magnolia bark. I have only barely scratched the surface of, especially its traditional uses are much more vast. But what I tend to work with it for is the same sort of thing that I learned from Leslie and also from Mary, is to help with people who are dealing with stress response, modulating when those cortisol levels are getting too high. Does seem to have a little bit of benefit for blood sugar, kind of like we talked about with holy basil, but it tends to be a little bit more specific for supporting reduced anxiety, reduced stress response, that we're not as likely to go into fight or flight. And then also to help folks who are waking up in the middle of the night, like being at like 2 o'clock in the morning, and they're not able to fall back asleep. That's a common pattern for a lot of different reasons, and no one herb works for everybody, but magnolia bark is definitely an herb to consider adding to your sleep blend with some maybe stronger sleep herbs for that kind of a state. And often it is really, really helpful. And it's, many of us have it growing in our ecosystem. I would make sure that in your landscape that there aren't any chemicals being used that might also, affect the quality of the plant. But if you have unsprayed magnolia, you can check it out and try playing with it. Also, tulip poplar is closely related, and according to Leslie, can be used similarly. I've only used the one in my yard, so I only personally have experience with that one, and the star magnolia type, and that is the one that Leslie says is the best one for the sleep, but you can try other species too. So it has been studied in like extracts and pill forms for things like sleep disturbances in folks who are menopausal. Also has been shown to help with boosting brain function, inhibiting acetylcholinesterase and supporting acetylcholine, which is that little, it's an important neurotransmitter that it supports, and also helping with stress eating and blood sugar levels and mood and anxiety. And it's not really sedating per se, it's more calming. So I do use it in formulas in folks to use during the daytime who are dealing with like anxiety, as well as in sleep blends at nighttime. So nervines are herbs that support the nervous system. And, some people use the term nervine to mean like anything that affects the nervous system in any way, like coffee is a nervine. I'd say most herbalists that I know are using it more to refer to like the nerve tropho-restorative. So tropho-restorative means an herb that brings that thing back into balance. So in the case of a nerve tropho-restorative, it brings the nervous system into a more balanced, nourished state. So they tend to be gently calming, but not too sedating. And they tend to be really nice for people who are stressed or anxious, or their nerves seem fried, or maybe they're a little bit more likely to be on the depressed side. And they work really well, especially in formula with other herbs. There are lots of them, and many of them grow really nicely in the garden, and some of them are wild as well, but we're going to focus on just a few. So the herbs we just talked about are all also nervine. So holy basil, ashwagandha, and magnolia are not just adaptogens or adaptogen-like, but they're also happen to be nervines. But lemon balm is not an adaptogen, but it is an excellent nervine, and it's gently calming and uplifting, and many of us grow this one already in the garden. It's really easy to grow. It even gets a little bit weedy. Sometimes if there's my sense of smell is still a little bit off from some infections earlier this year, but normally it smells really nice, like a little bit of like a lemon pledgy aroma, and most of us harvest it before it flowers. You can harvest it once it's flowered. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll cut it back in the flowering stage, and then I'll get a little bit more of that younger, more vibrant growth that is just even, you can tell just by looking at it, this one's not too bad yet, but it'll start to turn kind of brown and dry, whereas this is like juicy and aromatic. And so you just can tell by your senses that, especially as this one would get on in age, that this would be a little bit better quality to work with. Long history of use of lemon balm throughout the world, but especially throughout Europe, the Middle East, and Mediterranean countries. And there are a handful of clinical trials that support its tradition of use. But like this plant is in some of the oldest English written herbals that are still in existence. Ibn Sina in Persia, a Persian I believe he was Persian, really famous Persian medical professional, wrote about lemon balm. So really great plant. I love it because it's gently calming but uplifting. Along with holy basil, they make a great combo together. It tends to be really nice for easing things like grief and anxiety. They support sleep but aren't too sedating, so you could take them during the daytime. They also have that nootropic or brain boosting benefit, and this is that word right there, the nootropic, nuo or nootropic, kind of like a smart herb. And it's a great herb for everything from kids to elders, for everyone. Tends that all those age groups tend to do really, really well with lemon balm. And I would work with an herbalist who specializes in pregnancy if you're pregnant or nursing, but generally speaking, most people find that modest amounts of lemon balm are safe during pregnancy and nursing as well. And it seems to help with focus and cognition, especially when you just need to be calm but alert at the same time. So agitation, irritation, anger, frustration, impulsivity, attention deficit types of things, hyperactivity. Lemon balm just seems to kind of bring that down a notch without over sedating, which is really nice. For sleep at nighttime, it's nice to have it as a strong, small cup of tea, but you can also use tinctures or other formats too. Lemon balm is really sensitive. You know, holy basil can get kind of low quality in commerce, but lemon balm loses its potency pretty quickly, even once you tincture it. You know, usually once you make an alcohol extract, it's good for years and years and years. But with something like lemon balm, I do find that after maybe 3 years or so, even the tincture starts to lose its activity. And I've been surprised by a lot of my clients that have said that the tinctures that they buy in the stores, even really good quality companies that I normally really like, just don't work as well for them as, you know, the sort of homemade, where you're chopping up your plant, you're throwing lots and lots and lots of plant material into a jar and covering it with high proof alcohol, straining it out. So really strong, working with extracting it as a fresh plant, and that works better than the commercially available products. And they're really easy to make. I have videos and slides and things on how to make tinctures. It's not something that you need to have a special degree to make your own homemade tinctures. So it works really well that way. I do also like it as a tea, but again, this is one that I'd like to get from my own garden dried or get it from a local farm. I don't usually buy this one in the general herb market because it's just not great quality. It loses a lot of its lemony aroma no matter what, but it loses its aroma even more if it's a long time or it's been improperly handled. So, but it's a great tea to drink at night after dinner to support blood sugar, to support sleep. For folks who get kind of hypervigilant at night and are like, what's that sound? Or really like worry about their safety at night, things like lemon balm and holy basil, having that in the evening tends to be nice. A lot of times I'll take sprigs of lemon balm and holy basil and put them in cold water or cold seltzer, which is not as strong of an extract, but you get a lot of the aromatics of them, and it is a nice, refreshing, kind of gently stress reducing thing to drink during the day, especially in those hotter summer months where you might not want to be drinking a lot of hot things. And there's just so much to say about it. It's a great herb for the cardiovascular system, helping with blood pressure a little bit, with heart, you know, tachycardia, those kinds of things, especially if it's benign, but just, you know, when you're stressed, things seem to be skipping a beat a little bit. And also does tend to be, it's not our biggest one, but it does tend to be helpful for our cholesterol and other lipid levels. It's a little bit anti-inflammatory. It's a great antiviral for herpes, and it may even have some supportive effects in the early, like kind of preventative, as well as just during COVID infection. It's not going to get rid of it, but it may help reduce the viral load a little bit if it's taken early on. And it also has some of those anti-inflammatory stress relieving benefits. And so a lot of times people do feel just a little bit better when they're having that as a tea while they're dealing with being sick at home. Obviously, if you need to go get emergent medical care, go do that. Lemon balm's not going to help in some things like the breathing and the more extreme cases, but it is a nice supportive herb for a lot of things. So great herb, really easy to grow. Most of you probably already have it in your garden. So uplifting herbs, St. John's wort's the biggie, and I didn't include it in this slideshow as one of my key herbs because it doesn't work for a lot of people. It has a lot of drug interactions, and it tends to take a couple months to kick in. But I did want to introduce you to mimosa, which is an invasive plant in a lot of areas. So if it's invasive where you are, do not plant it. It's actually illegal to plant it, but you also might be really regretful that you planted this kind of small shrubby tree in your yard. It's very pretty if you just have one, but it will send up lots of suckers and it can kind of just sort of take over. But if you're in an area where it's growing already, you might be able to find it somewhere and harvest it, making sure that you're getting it from somewhere where there's not a lot of pollution or contamination or anything like that. So I've tended to see mimosa more. It doesn't grow easily where I am in zone 4, but it will grow up to about zone 5 or 6. I've seen it in Massachusetts in a landscape where it's usually not invasive in that cold of a climate, but it still exists. And then I've seen it super invasive in like the DC area. It's just growing by the roadsides. It's not where you're going to want to harvest, but you might be able to find it on an organic farm that's got a bunch of it growing, and you might be able to go harvest it there. It's another herb from traditional Chinese medicine like the magnolia is, and but it's just a really great mood boosting herb. It's sometimes called the tree of collective happiness. And within like one dose, you just feel a little happier, and you can use it on a regular basis. And it does tend to have a little bit of an anxiety reducing property to it as well. It's not overly sedating, which is nice, but just kind of calming. It does sometimes bring up trauma. So if you are dealing with like PTSD, trauma, those kinds of things, it's a nice one to have just before you go into your therapy session so that you can deal with that trauma a little bit more, and then folks usually feel a lot better afterwards. But if you're not quite ready to bring that trauma up to the surface, just be a little careful. Some people do okay with it, but some people find that trauma upheaval, even if it's part of the healing process, is a little challenging in the moment. So you want to make sure that you have nice supports for that. Great plant. We can use the flowers, work with the flowers, but the bark is the strongest part, and you can make a tea, you can make a tincture, you can do other recipes with it. I usually tincture the fresh bark or the dried bark and work with it that way. And there are some, Michael Tierra has some really great writings, but so do a couple other folks as well. So we only have a few minutes. I'm just going to see how many more I can get to. We're getting to some of the more calming herbs. I have lavender here, but it's really not an herb I'm going to mention. It's in the bonus slides. But I do have motherwort. So motherwort is also unnerving. Mine is going by. It has different shapes to the leaves. So you can see in that picture, they're a little bit longer and almost like three-pronged, like a little three-pronged fork, whereas you might be able to see in my video here that this one's almost like kind of maple leaf like. When they first come out with leaves, they tend to be a little bit broader leaves, and then as the plant gets taller and starts to bloom, those leaves tend to get narrower and more pointy. You also tend to get these bracts that hold the flowers, and they get kind of sharp. They can even give you a little bit of a splinter, and it's super bitter. And you'll get a bloom earlier in summer, and then they kind of die back, and then you get a little bit of a second flush. It may or may not flower, but you usually get a second flush of vibrant leaves that you could work with later in the season as well. So that's kind of where we're at in the garden. This is my favorite for working with anxiety, specifically, especially working with panic attacks, because it is just phenomenally grounding. It's super bitter, so most of us aren't going to want to have it as tea, and it probably is a little better fresh. So I usually tincture it. You could use vinegar or vinegar honey base if you wanted an alcohol-free version, and it just tends to be really grounding. Calms the heart when it's acting a little bit awry, you know, maybe beating too much, or when you feel tension in your heart. It does have some hypotensive, so blood pressure lowering effects as well, but it just kind of within minutes oftentimes will help bring down a panic or anxiety attack, especially when you're feeling it in your heart, and also just for day-to-day anxiety. I like to say that this herb is for people who feel underappreciated and overworked, which is often moms, but can also be other parents of other genders, whoever is kind of doing the main caretaking, because everybody wants a piece of them and they're always trying to do so many things, and it's just really stressful. And sometimes we just need to stop and put the oxygen mask on ourselves before we put it on other people. And motherwort kind of gives us that moment to just stop and give ourselves a little bit of TLC. And what I love about it is it's not just helping us in that moment of acute stress and anxiety and overwhelm and, you know, just moody mood swings and all of that, but it also seems to support in us the ability to do the self-care that we really should be doing to support us so that we don't feel so overworked. So it's not just like, oh, I'm just going to take this herb and keep doing whatever I need to do, but it makes us just kind of have a moment to be able to take care of ourselves. It does seem to be really helpful, especially for ovarian and estrogenic hormone wobbles. So dealing with things like PMS mood swings or menopause, sometimes even hot flashes. It can sometimes bring them down, especially with regular use. It does have some really great heart tonic properties, especially when the heart stuff and the stress tend to coincide. So it is a nice one to consider there. It can be a little bit blood pressure lowering. So usually that's a good thing, but you just would want to watch that it's not too blood pressure lowering for you. And yeah, there's so much more I could probably say about that. I think it's a really underutilized plant in the garden, and it is very good at self-seeding. I love those fierce little flowers that it gets. And once you have it, it'll self-seed to where it wants to be, and it's pretty easy to pull up if it grows somewhere where you don't want it. So you can enjoy that. And I'm just going to mention, because we're at the tail end of our talk, and I'm not seeing any questions pop up, but maybe it's not on my screen. I'll just mention real quick that passion flower is a plant that grows more in southern areas like southeast United States. It really likes it to be a little bit warmer, a little bit more humid. And New Hampshire is on the edge. Like, it usually won't survive the winters here, but you can grow it in a pot, which is what I do. If you're in those warmer climates where it can stay in the ground throughout the winter, and it doesn't even have to be that much warmer than New Hampshire. I know folks in Ohio who grow it year to year. It really will get big and like grow a lot. It's a vine, and it really will take over an area. So just be mindful of where you plant it. If you're growing it in pot, it's beautiful and will climb along. You can work with it, make medicine with the aerial parts and the flowers. The flowers are kind of cool, but it's not as, you know, robust as it would be if it was growing in the ground. Really nice, calming, a little bit more sedating herb, and really great one for sleep. Just be aware that there are a lot of different kinds. So, you know, this is a different kind of the passion flower, and we're really just using the Passiflora incarnata as the primary one that's used medicinally. There might be a little activity to some of the other ones, but I would seek it from a really good source that you can trust that you're getting the main medicinal one. So I'll mention that there's more info in your slides. And there's also valerian, which is another really lovely herb that's very easy to grow, can even get a little bit weedy in the garden, and we're using the roots of that, but it doesn't work for everybody. That one's a little bit more tweaky as far as who it works for and who it doesn't. And you can check out the slides for more info. In your slides, you do have some other extra things, like some, you know, what some of the best formats for different herbs are, some tips on sourcing herbs and some of my favorite farms and places to get things, and some resources. So if you're wanting to dive deeper into any of these plants, some books and websites that are really good at giving really high quality, detailed information on these particular plants in general. So that's that. Let me bring back my camera here. And Karen, do we have any questions?
We do have a few.
Okay, cool.
And I think many of them are in your extra resources. So one that I don't know whether it's there or not, let me ask, is are these herbs meant for short-term use, like 1 to 3 months, or longer, up to a year or more?
So all the herbs that we're talking about today could be used on a daily basis if that seemed to be how it would best work for somebody. But they also, all the herbs I just mentioned, are herbs that could be used for shorter periods of time, for just like a day, a moment, a week, a couple months. So they're pretty adaptable, and I would listen to your body as far as what your body really wants. If it just needs that occasional little burst of support for a period of time or for a day or two, or if it feels like you're just doing better, that you need that deeper support on a regular basis, these particular herbs can be used that way. There are some other ones that are in some of the slides that I'd say are much better with regular use, like St. John's wort. If it's the right plant for you, it takes like several weeks to a couple months for it to even kick in. And so usually that's one somebody would want to use regularly. Or gotu kola, very subtle plant. And usually that's one that would be best with like higher doses, regular use. But the things that we're talking about today are all pretty potent in the moment and are all safe to take long term as well.
Okay. And a couple other questions just about dosing. Someone wanted to know if they were feeling a bit anxious, can they chew on a Tulsi basil leaf, or do you need to prepare it? Similar question about how much lemon balm would you put into a teacup if you were going to
Well,
use that?
I had that slide earlier on that had general herb doses, and those are
Mhm.
pretty spot on for the herbs that we just discussed. But I would always just start with a small amount and listen to your body, and then gradually build the dose up to see what
Great.
dose works best for you. You can, if especially for some of these more tender things like lemon balm and holy basil, those ones you could just walk up to them in the garden and nibble on them, and you'll have some benefits right that way. Or shove them fresh into a mug and cover them with hot or cold water and then sip them. So they're pretty adaptable, but it's just convenient for working with them on a regular basis to make something with them. And
Right.
once you've extracted them into a solvent like tea and water or alcohol for a tincture or vinegar and honey, what you do extract out in that liquid solvent absorbs really quickly into the body, which is nice. So that's one of the perks of that as well. You may not get everything out in your extract. What you do get out in those liquid extracts tends to be very bioavailable and fast acting in the body.
Well, and moving into the colder months when these may not be available in your garden anymore, it's helpful to know how to use those as well.
Yeah, and a lot of these things do have, I mentioned a few like the lemon balm and the holy basil that I feel like, especially like dried products on the market, are kind of not that great. But in many cases, there are some really wonderful products on the market. So if you didn't have it in your garden now, there are a lot of great companies that are listed in the extra resource slides that you could get some plants to work with and then grow it in your garden next year.
Right, right. Great food for thought, medicine for thought, as they say. Thank you so much, Maria. We could go on all afternoon asking questions, I'm sure, but you've provided us with so many wonderful resources that we
And
really do
there's so
appreciate.
many more plants in the slides. So definitely check out the slides because they're like so many, but I knew we wouldn't have time for them in 1 hour, which is totally
Right,
okay. It would have been too
right.
overwhelming anyway.
It's better to take these things in small bites or small
Yeah,
doses, huh?
exactly. So, well, thank you very much. I hope everybody has a lovely autumn and that, maybe some of these plants will help you feel better and more optimally throughout the day. And yeah, so happy herbal
Absolutely.
adventures.
Thank you so much, Maria. We will enjoy all the handouts you've given us, and do check out her books because they are a wealth of information as well, and lots of good growing information in them as well.
Yeah, especially grow your own herbal remedies. All these plants and more are in that book. So
For sure.
great.
Sure. Well, thank you so much.
Thank
And that's
you.
all for now. Thanks. Check our website for our next webinar coming up next month. Bye for now.